Hello and welcome back to CSS3 Animations. In this video, we're going to talk about how to create a collapsible accordion navigation using only CSS3. Now let me go ahead and point out that this is not a fully functioning accordion. If you really want to get into the nitty-gritty and make it work like an accordion is supposed to work, then I highly advise using JavaScript or jQuery to do that. CSS3 is very limited in the amount of interactivity that you can really create. However, using some of these techniques that we've talked about and putting a little bit of a twist on those techniques, we can make a somewhat functional accordion menu. So right now, our accordion menu is all expanded. Well, we want all of the content within the accordions, everything with the gray background, we want all of that to be hidden by default. And then when we click on one of the accordion items, then it will animate out. So let's get started by making this content hidden. So before we can do that, we need to take a look at our HTML to see how everything is structured. So if we scroll down here, we have here an unordered list with a class of accordion, and then each list item contains a anchor tag with an H3 tag inside of it, and that's going to be the header with a pink background or the light red background. And then after that, we have a div with the class of hidden, which contains all of our paragraph text. And that div, as the class name implies, is going to be hidden by default. So let's jump into our CSS. Notice that we're in lesson 10 now. So we also need to make sure that we point to lesson 10 in our browser. So in our CSS file, if we scroll down towards the bottom, we have a section labeled accordion. And we already have a few default styles applied to it to get the look that we currently have. And if we want to hide this text that's inside the div with a class of hidden, then we can scroll down here almost all the way to the bottom and we see a rule here for div.hidden. Now you'll see we've set the background color for that div to EEE, which is a very, very light gray color. And we've set the overflow to hidden because what we're going to do is we're going to set the height of this div to 0. And we don't want to be able to see the text when we do that. If we don't have overflow set to hidden, then when we collapse the height of this, we'll still see the text outside of the div. So we want to make sure that that overflow is set to hidden, and then we can change our height. So in between these two rules here, I'm going to set our height equal to 0 for those hidden divs. So we'll save that, jump back into Chrome and refresh, and there we go, everything has collapsed. So let's jump back into our file here, our CSS file, and talk about how we can make this thing animate. So the item that's going to animate is going to be this div with a class of hidden. So that's where we need to place this particular transition. So we'll go to the very last statement in that rule, go to the next line. So we're going to do this using the short code that we've talked about. So transition : space all space, and we want this to take 0.3 seconds, and I'm going to use the ease function. So let's copy that, paste it 3 times, and let's put our vendor prefixes here so we don't forget to do that. And there we go. So once we have those in place, we can create the actual animation. Now by default, our height is set to 0 so that it is in fact hidden. And when we click on a particular anchor tag that's tied to this hidden div, then we want that height to animate out. However, things get a little tricky there because we have a hover subclass, but the hover subclass isn't going to work. We don't want these to expand out whenever we hover over those anchor tags. We want it to expand out after we click on those anchor tags. Well, there's a trick for making this happen. I'm going to jump into the index.html file. And you'll notice again, inside each list item, the very first item is an anchor tag. And you'll notice that I've assigned an ID of item 1 to the first one, item 2 to the second one, item 3 to the third one. And we've also given them an href of #item1. So what that'll do is that will link to the current page to this particular item 1 anchor tag. And when we do that, we can use the target pseudo class of our anchor tags in order to change the height of this particular div. So the way we would do that is we would point to, first of all, this particular anchor tag with an ID of item 1, :target. So we'd use that :target pseudo class, and then we'd point to the div with a class of hidden that comes right after that. So let's talk about how we do that. We're going to go back to our CSS file, and underneath our hidden rule, and then underneath this rule where we have the paragraphs within that hidden div, we're going to go to the very end, skip a couple lines, and I'm going to create another rule for an anchor tag with an ID of item 1, and then we're going to point to the target pseudo class. So whenever that particular anchor tag has been targeted or clicked on, we want to point to the div with the class of hidden that comes right after that anchor tag. And the way we do that is we type plus div.hidden. So this will target the hidden div that comes right after the anchor tag with an ID of item 1. That's what the plus sign does there. It points to the div with the class of hidden that comes right after this particular item. So inside that rule, we want to change the height. So let's try a height of 150 pixels. Now, unfortunately, there's no way in CSS3 to animate from a height of 0 to a height of auto. So we can't just try to detect the height of that particular div and then animate to that height using just CSS. We would actually have to use JavaScript in order to accomplish something like that. And we're not talking about JavaScript in this series, we're just talking about CSS. So we're gonna have to hard code a value in here. So we've hard coded a value of 150 pixels. Let's see if that works. So let's save our files, go into our browser, refresh our page, and actually, first of all, let's make sure that we're pointing to just index.html with nothing after it. And then I'm gonna click on accordion item 1, and sure enough, it animates out. And when we click on a different item, you'll notice it animates back because that first anchor tag is no longer the target. That target pseudo class no longer applies to that because that particular link is no longer targeted. But when we click on it again, it will expand out. So basically, if we click on any link on this page, then whatever accordion item has been expanded will suddenly contract again. So let's do the same thing for item 2 and item 3. And we see that with item 1, that 150 pixels was tall enough. Now we have different heights within item 2 and item 3, so we're going to have to customize those a little bit. Item 2 will actually still work at 150 pixels. For item 3, we'll bring it down to about 80 pixels. So we'll jump back into our code, and we'll skip a couple lines at the end, and we'll do the same thing for item 2. So a pound item 2 colon target. So when that particular anchor tag has been targeted, we're going to point to the div with a class of hidden that comes right after that anchor tag. And we're going to set the height of that div to 150 pixels. And then we'll skip a couple lines and do it again for item 3, colon target plus div.hidden. And here we'll set the height to 80 pixels. Doesn't have to be quite as tall because there's less content in it. So let's make sure that works. Let's save that, jump back into our file, refresh, and actually let's go back to index.html without anything after it. So everything's collapsed. We click on item 1, it expands. We click on item 2, item 1 collapses and item 2 expands. We click on item 3 and that expands while everything else collapses. So it works really well under certain circumstances. Now if we were to create more content on the page that's long enough to make the page scrollable, then the functionality gets a little weird. So let's say, I'm just going to grab a bunch of text and paste it here. So let's grab this particular paragraph here, copy it, and then come down to the end of that unordered list right here, go to the next line, and I'm just going to paste that paragraph several times just to make sure that we have enough content to make this page scroll. So we'll save that, and then we'll jump back to index.html without anything after it. And as you can see, our page is now scrolling. Well, when we open up accordion item 1, it opens up like it's supposed to, but the problem is because of the way we have this set up with named anchors, it scrolls up to wherever that item starts. And if we click on accordion item 2, it's going to jump up and do things that don't necessarily make sense. So again, this is a very limited application, a very limited accordion that we're creating here. If you really want to create a fully functional accordion, then again, I suggest that you do that using JavaScript or jQuery. However, considering that we've done this with only CSS, that's pretty impressive. It's cool that we're able to do that. So I'm going to go back into our file and I'm going to get rid of all of these extra paragraphs that we pasted here. We don't need those anymore. We'll save that and then just refresh our page again so that we can see it working like it's supposed to, and everything looks good. So if you ever do, for some reason, decide to create an accordion like this, make sure that it's on a page where that's one of the only items on the page. So you don't have to worry about that scrolling issue. And there we go. So that's just another creative way that we can use CSS3 to make some cool animations on our website. So with that done, let's move on to the next video. Thank you for watching.